Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you tonight from Ra'anana, just outside of Tel Aviv. This is episode 94 of Inside Israel, entitled Rethinking Gaza. Something I think we all need to do right now. And my goal for this episode, I want to take stock as to where we are right now regarding Gaza. It's been 676 days since October 7th. I mean, let's just let that sink in for a second. 676 days. We still have living hostages in Gaza being held, which is unthinkable. 676 days. We still have thousands of soldiers there. The remains of hostages who've been killed are still in Gaza. And some big declarations came out of Israel this week. So, in light of these declarations, I think we really need to assess where do we stand and where are we going, and in the process, perhaps question some of the assumptions that we've had since the beginning. So let's talk about first, where do we stand? As I mentioned, 676 days since October 7th, more than 450 IDF soldiers killed since October 7th. This does not include the number who were killed on the 7th or in battles in Israel just after October 7th. This is the number of soldiers killed in Gaza since the war began, more than 450. When we talk of wounded, thousands of Israeli soldiers wounded, many of them with life-altering injuries, the kind that they will not recover from ever. Between 2 and 3,000, as far as I know, with life-altering permanent injuries. Whether it's a limb that is now gone or multiple limbs, we have many multiple amputees as a result of the war. Soldiers who are blind in one or both eyes, deaf, and we have many who mentally are not. I'm going to use the word that the mother of a soldier used recently in a conversation with someone I know. It's a horrible world. It's a horrible word. But the mother said that her son is a vegetable and that part of her wishes that he had been killed because the state he's in mentally, he doesn't function anymore. His brain does not function, yet he still needs to eat, has bodily needs, bodily functions, but otherwise, as she describes it, is not a human being. And she's, in this conversation, said that she's ashamed to say this, but I know she's not alone. Why does this matter, what I'm telling you right now? It matters because this week, Netanyahu and his war cabinet approved plans to conquer Gaza. And since that initial declaration, it's been revised a bit to conquer Gaza City. And once that declaration came out that it's not to conquer all of Gaza, but just to conquer, at this point, Gaza City, a number of members of the right-wing coalition actually said that they're upset that it wasn't all of Gaza, and they are now threatening to bring down the government. In any case, we need to look at this idea of conquering Gaza City. If you don't know what that means, then you are not alone. I don't know what that means, and I can assure you that no one in Israel, including the prime minister himself, knows what is meant by the phrase conquer Gaza or conquer Gaza City. What does it mean to conquer a city or conquer all of Gaza? There are 2 million Palestinians in Gaza right now. Does this mean that we are responsible for feeding them? Does it mean that we are responsible for their safety? against Hamas because Hamas sometimes does attack its own people. There are armed gangs circulating within Gaza, taking control of the economy, of the food. Is the IDF then responsible for keeping Gazans safe from them? Nobody knows what exactly that means. It's worth stating that the IDF chief of staff, the highest ranking officer in the IDF, the guy in charge of the IDF, Ayal Zamir, is against the idea of attempting to conquer Gaza or Gaza City. And I just want to note that he has a son who is a soldier right now in Gaza. There are not many militaries in the world where the chief of staff has a child serving actively in a dangerous combat zone. Side note. So the fact that the chief of staff is against conquering Gaza City, Gaza at large, that says something. That says that it's not a good idea. You know, what they say about military men is that when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? That military men, their first instinct is to always see war as the answer. Conquering, battle is the answer. So when the IDF chief of staff comes out and says that conquering Gaza and Gaza City is not the answer, that is worth listening to. And yet Netanyahu and his war cabinet are not listening to him. If anything, they think that it's not far enough merely to conquer Gaza City, that we need to conquer all of Gaza. So why is the chief of staff against this? He pointed out two main reasons. Number one, that he worries for the safety of the hostages. And he's pretty much said, and this is the feeling in Israel, that if we go ahead and attempt to conquer Gaza City and the rest of Gaza, we are essentially giving up entirely on the idea of bringing the hostages home alive. It was just about a year ago that 6 hostages, including Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland, were executed, were put to death by Hamas because IDF troops were closing in on the area in which they were held. And Hamas has stated unequivocally that this is their plan moving forward, that as the IDF approaches areas where hostages are being held, Hamas will simply execute those hostages. It's almost as if Netanyahu wants those hostages executed so that he can go ahead and conquer Gaza without having to worry about hostages anymore. Unbelievable that I would say that, but how can you not think that that might be the case when the chief of staff himself is saying that we shouldn't be doing this? So that's concern number one, that to attempt to conquer Gaza, Gaza City, would be giving up on hostages, endangering them. Number two, the chief of staff, Zamir, is worried about casualties to IDF soldiers. It's been estimated that we're looking at multiple hundreds of deaths of IDF soldiers if the IDF were to attempt to conquer Gaza, as stated in the original plan. And I'm sure it's roughly the same if we, quote unquote, only attempt to conquer Gaza City. We're talking hundreds of deaths of IDF soldiers. Who knows how many wounded? Now, as you can probably tell, I personally am against this idea of attempting to conquer either Gaza City or all of Gaza. And here is why, along with 3 aspects that we really need to consider with regards to this plan. So number one, the public by far is against it. 70+% of Israelis favor ending the war now, even if that means pulling out the IDF entirely. On top of that, mainstream news outlets here in Israel are now reporting that, according to international law, it's no longer debatable that Israel is committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip. Again, this isn't fringe media outlets, and it's not even Haaretz. Haaretz is sort of the left wing, progressive, liberal newspaper here in Israel, still very respected and well read by a certain class. By no means would I call it fringe, but it is the progressive left wing paper. But we're not just talking about Haaretz. We're talking about Times of Israel and other media outlets are now saying that according to international law, Israel is committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip. David Grossman, who is one of Israel's most respected and premier writers, his own son, Uri, was killed in Gaza just about 19 years ago. David Grossman this past week said it pains him, but he has no choice to use the word genocide when it comes to what Israel is doing in Gaza. So these are no longer anti-Israel haters in London or New York or Sydney. These are Israeli journalists from the center and Israeli artists and writers who are respected, who are now saying that we can't deny it anymore, that war crimes and genocide are being committed. So the public is against it for this reason and for the reasons I mentioned before. The fear of what would happen to the hostages and of what would happen to IDF soldiers if we were actually to go in and attempt to conquer. The second reason why I'm against this, and another aspect we need to consider here, is the global narrative. The world sees Gazans as starving and suffering, and it's really impossible at this point to deny that this is happening. And we lost hold of this narrative long ago, if we ever had it at all. It kind of no longer matters if Hamas is looting the aid or not, or if armed gangs are stealing the aid and selling it off. That ship has sailed about with regards to how it's happening and why it's happening, why starvation is happening. What the world sees right now is Gazans starving. And regardless of the reasons behind it, the perception has become reality. And it's one that we can no longer deny. And this is going to do damage to Israel for years to come. I mean, I think of my childhood. I heard all about South Africa and apartheid. I can't say I really knew what that meant when I was 10 years old. But even now, many years later, there's still a stain in my mind when I think of South Africa. I will always associate it with something bad, with apartheid, which I remember from my childhood hearing about. And in that same way, I really do fear that young people around the world are going to carry this image of Israel forward. Because like I said, it's no longer the anti-Israel folks. It's no longer the haters. It's no longer the ones marching at Columbia and Berkeley and the UC California system and wherever else. It's normal people who are watching television or seeing the headlines on the internet and seeing Gazans starving and seeing that Netanyahu is planning to conquer Gaza and doesn't seem to care at all about the civilian population there. They're not interested in whether that population supports Hamas or not. And I'm sure many of them, probably most, don't even have a favorable opinion of Hamas. Unlike the haters who might think that they're freedom fighters, we're just talking about ordinary people who are now seeing Israel as a nation that starves civilians. So that global narrative is another reason why the idea of conquering Gaza and Gaza City is simply a mistake. And there's another very big and maybe the most important perception that we need to rethink and sort of question here. And that idea is the one that says that a Palestinian state is a reward for what happened on October 7th. A number of countries lately have been saying that they are going to soon recognize a Palestinian state. Macron in France, I think, was the first, and then the UK and others. And there's this widespread belief in among many in Israel, not all, but among many, certainly on the right, that a Palestinian state is necessarily a reward for what happened on October 7th. And I really think that we need to question that point of view, that assumption that a Palestinian state in Gaza is a reward for terrorism. And here's why. Nobody is saying that we should have a Palestinian state in Gaza that is ruled by Hamas. A true reward for October 7th would be a Palestinian state in which Hamas were to stay in power. That would be a reward for terrorism. But the last thing Hamas wants is to be left out of a Palestinian state. What they want is a Palestinian state in all of Israel. So for the international community to declare that there is a Palestinian state limited to Gaza, limited to the West Bank, and that Hamas is not part of it, that is the opposite of what Hamas wants. And I think we need to get it out of our heads that a state in Gaza, a Palestinian state, or the two-state solution in general, is a reward for terrorism. I do not think it's a reward for terrorism. We need to stop thinking that. It is the only way, and I mean the only way, that Israelis ultimately will be safe. Finally, we have the international community recognizing Israel and recognizing the threats Israel faces in Gaza and in the West Bank. And we have the leaders of these countries in the UK, in France, saying we do not want Hamas to be part of the leadership. This is what Israel needs. For too long, the international community has not even been paying attention to the enemies that Israel has on its borders. Now they finally are, and they're saying that we do not want Hamas to be a part of it. So this idea that a state would be rewarding terrorism, I think we need to drop that assumption, or at least question it very rigorously. I no longer believe it's true. And I say this as someone with a kid who's about to go into the army and another one about to in 3 more years. And I will say this, if you don't have a child about to go into the IDF in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think you have the same right to declare what the right solution is here with regards to a Palestinian state or not. If your blood isn't on the line, then I don't think your opinion should count as much as those of us who do have blood on the line and skin in the game. And it's worth pointing out that the main architects of this plan to conquer Gaza, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, did not serve in the IDF themselves, nor do they have kids serving in the IDF now. So it's really easy to talk about reward for terrorism when you don't have to go out and defend it yourself. Now, look, I'm not saying it would be easy to have a Palestinian state next to Israel. The whole idea, everyone has said that it should be demilitarized. It should not have a military of its own. But finally, you have all these other countries agreeing with Israel that it should be demilitarized. This is an opportunity where the international community is recognizing the threat that Israel faces. And Netanyahu is pissing it away for his own political gain. Because the only way Netanyahu can stay in power is if this war keeps going. Now, that said, I do want to explain why so many Israelis are not ready for a Palestinian state right now. I think the rest of the world is able to distinguish between Hamas and civilians in Gaza, or maybe not as able, wants to, or prefers to distinguish between Hamas and civilians in Gaza. And again, I'm not talking about the kids who storm libraries at Columbia and those who join them and the lifelong anti-Israel haters. I think for most middle of the road people in the US, at least, they distinguish between Hamas and Gazans. And that's why they say there should be a Palestinian state without Hamas being part of it. But Israelis see something different, and you need to understand this. For Israelis, it is much harder to distinguish between Hamas and quote unquote ordinary Gazan civilians. I want to remind you that on October 7th, it wasn't just Hamas militants and Islamic Jihad terrorists who stormed southern Israel. It was ordinary Gazans, kids in flip-flops, young men who came into Israel and took hostages and took property and looted homes for their own sport, taking booty, right? So, and we know that when our hostages got to Gaza, Israeli civilians I'm talking about, they were kicked and beaten by ordinary Gazans in the street. And they were often held hostage by Gazan families, ordinary families. So for Israelis, this idea of a Palestinian state for ordinary Gazans, but without Hamas, that idea can't really exist in many Israelis' minds. The Venn diagram has a lot more overlap between ordinary Gazans and Hamas militants. I would say that there's almost no part of that Venn diagram that isn't overlapped, only a small sliver for many Israelis. Now, I come from a different point of view. I grew up in the US, so I'm not like a true Israeli in my blood. And so maybe that's why I see it a little differently. That's why I am willing to say that a Palestinian state is not necessarily a reward for terrorism. And believe me, it's not that I distinguish necessarily between Hamas and ordinary Gazans, but I just feel that if this country, meaning ours, Israel, is to have a future, we all know how the story ends. The only way it will have a future, it's not with soldiers occupying Gaza eternally. It's some sort of separation, a demilitarized separation. And I think we have a chance right now for the world community to join us in demilitarizing it and bringing security to Israel without Hamas being a part of the narrative. So that's why I'm against this idea that a state is a reward for terrorism and against the idea of conquering Gaza and Gaza City overall. So where do we stand right now? Like, what is next for Israel? Well, the Hostage Family Forum announced that they are calling on the public to take part in a general strike next Sunday. That would be the 17th of August, this coming Sunday. And there's been talk for a long time in Israel, like what do we do? What do ordinary citizens do? The government clearly doesn't care if we protest in the streets. Netanyahu doesn't care if the chief of staff is against the idea of conquering Gaza. Like, what do we actually do? We're powerless. And for a while, what's been said is the only thing we could actually do is to shut down the economy, to bring the country to a halt, to grind it to a halt by shutting the economy down. And that is what the Hostage Family Forum is calling on the Israeli public to do next week. Already, the high-tech community has said that they will participate in this. I assume that means they will not be going to work that day, that they'll be marching. I don't know how long it will last. Is this a one-day strike? Can you cripple an economy in one day? Certainly, it must take longer. To really make this strike work, the Histadrut, the National Labor Union, would have to get on board and sign off. And so far, the Histadrut has said that they will not participate. I'm curious if that will change. But right now, that is what is being talked about. A general strike on the 17th of August, with the idea being that we will grind the country to a halt, shut down the economy, and then, and only then, would the prime minister and the chief of staff feel themselves under so much pressure that they would back down from these plans to conquer Gaza and Gaza City. In addition to that, the Hostage Family Forum is calling on soldiers to refuse to serve in Gaza. And they're making the argument that you are being used as a pawn. You are going to be marching into a terrorist hotbed. I mean, that's where Hamas is right now. They must be in Gaza City. That's where they're hiding out with the hostages. And so they are saying, the Hostage Family Forum is saying to soldiers, refuse the order, because otherwise you will be marching into booby-trapped buildings, into into a combat zone where Hamas is waiting for you, hiding underground. If you're a commander, if you're an officer, you will be leading your troops into these situations. Refuse the order. In all my time being in Israel, I don't think I've ever heard a public cry, a public demand to soldiers to refuse the order to participate in combat. But that is where we stand right now. One final piece of philosophy is I really think that we are at a crossroads for what Israel will be, not just for the next 5 years or 10 years, but maybe for the next 50 or 100 if we can make it that long. And believe me, there are some very smart people in this country who do not believe that we can make it that long, given the situation right now, given the economic divisions, given the social and religious divisions. But this really is a pivotal moment I think, in Israel's history and also in Jewish history. If we march into Gaza City with the attempt to take it over, and you see a high number of casualties among IDF soldiers, and you see hostages executed, I don't know how this country will live with itself. I don't know how we will ever look at ourselves again in the future. Will we look at ourselves differently? And will we survive as a country if that is in our rearview mirror? I can't stress enough how pivotal a moment this is in Israel's history. And yet, here we are on a normal afternoon listening to this, living through it. Only later, I think, will we look back and fully realize just how big a moment in Israel's history we are living through right now. I'm going to take a quick break and then be back in a moment with your questions. Welcome back to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff. This week from Ra'anana. And we had a number of questions come in, very similar. I'm going to read two of them and then address my thoughts. So this is from Gail. This is from Gail outside of Boston. Can you speak to alienation by allies, which appears to be increasing daily with images of starving children in Gaza and recent support of Palestinian statehood by government leaders? Okay, so that was one question. This one is from Donna in New Jersey, and I'll just add that Donna is a flight attendant who flies around the world and is able to sort of take the pulse of opinion on Israel from multiple places around the globe. She wrote to me from Portugal this week, and she said that from her hotel, She can see on a building adjacent to hers the phrase, kill the IDF, and then below that, Gazans are starving. Again, on buildings in Lisbon, in Portugal. And she wrote, it's pretty important to know what the news is all over the world right now. And it's that second statement, Gazans are starving, which is shown constantly in photos and in articles. And Donna writes, I wonder if Israelis realize that they have been losing allies and friends right and left. Everyone is now weighing in on this, and it is not favorable to Israel. A coworker I know just flew, a coworker I just flew with listens to a podcast that goes over the news in Norway. She said how disgusting Netanyahu is and I wouldn't think that she's someone that would have an opinion about him or Israel or anything in the Middle East prior to hearing that. This is a pivotal, important turning point for Israel in how it is viewed by the entire world. So, yeah, I mean, two really important angles here on an idea I addressed before. Here's what I heard, that we've always taken the Republican Party for granted in the US as friends of Israel. But what I heard this past week is that younger Republicans don't favor Israel at the same level or with the same amount of enthusiasm that older Republicans do. So, to answer the question that Gail asked, do Israelis realize that we're losing allies? I would say the answer is no. The average Israeli is not really thinking about that. What we're seeing is other countries saying that they will recognize a Palestinian state, and we'll talk about why doesn't the world understand our narrative? Where did we go wrong? How are we losing the war on social media? I don't think it's really occurring to Israelis, the everyday average Israeli, with everything going on, with worries about the hostages, with worries about IDF soldiers being injured and killed in Gaza in this endless war. I don't think the average Israeli is thinking about the possibility that we are permanently losing allies. And I don't just mean countries, but I mean people who will have a very hard time ever having a positive image of Israel again. But this is huge. I mean, this has implications. This has implications for how much funding Israel gets down the road, for how safe Jews are around the world, something you all know, with the rising rates of anti-Semitism pretty much everywhere. So no, I do not think that Israelis are aware of this slice of the story, that we are losing allies permanently. And yet it's one of the most dangerous aspects of this narrative that's unfolding right now. But again, that's why I feel we are at a pivotal moment in Israeli history. If we go forward with this plan to conquer Gaza City and possibly even conquer all of Gaza, I think it could change people's view of Israel forever. And that will have consequences. We'd have to be naive to think that it wouldn't. That is all for this week's episode of Inside Israel. I really appreciate you joining me for the live broadcast. Next week's broadcast will take place at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. That'll be Sunday, August 17th. The website, joelchasnoff.com/podcast, is where you can learn more about the podcast. It's where you can support it. It's also where you can send me your questions and feedback, which I always do welcome. This is a huge week for Israel. I wish all of you and all of us the very best and only safety and rak shalom. Until we meet again, thanks for joining. Lahitraot.